Give that a second, then I'll continue. There we go. Recording has been started. And then just some virtual announcements for this. As I stated, the meeting will be recorded and is being recorded. During the presentation, please mute yourself. If you have questions or need anything or comments, please feel free to put it in chat or raise your hand. I will be moderating as well. And then if you need live captioning is available in the meeting. And then at the end of the session, randomly, we will be picking a winner for a $25 gift card. And I will be adding that in. And then at the end of the session, we are doing a survey all day at the end of the session for a grand prize. So I will ask everybody, please, as it skips, please go to our site and fill out the survey for your sessions. And you can do that towards the end of your day because it'll ask questions on every survey or on every session you attend. As a board member, we really do appreciate feedback, and we try to formulate our events towards your feedback. So every event we are always improving, I feel. And I mean, it's the Surface Go 2, which are awesome travel devices. And all right. Over to you, Dennis.
Okay. So share the whole screen here and get it to kick off. All right, so feel free to tweet and post anything to encourage people to join throughout the day and other tracks or sessions that you find interesting. I want to thank our sponsors to make sure that we are able to continue to present this and get all our ideas together. Again, my name is Dennis Alexander. I'm an identity and access engineer. At the time, I worked for Land O'Lakes. I had extensive experience in as a collaboration engineer over the past years and new to the identity space. But I have done quite a bit of life cycle management in M365 as far as identities and the licensing of them in the past 6 years that we've been an M365 customer. What I want to cover today is the 4 stages of securing privilege access, and this really comes right from Microsoft's best practice. And I do have several links as a attachment to the end of this slide deck to allow for you to do some more research and find out those details. I'm not going to say that I'm an absolute expert, but I have found some things that were interesting, and I was encouraged by, at least at the level that we're currently at for operating system and M365, how seamless it was to at least get a pilot up and running. And then we're going to go through, I want to go through a demo tenant and actually show you guys how to configure the passwordless and configure some of the privileged identity management components. And then we'll hopefully walk through being able to register a user and then activate a eligible role with privileged identity management. If that registration fails, I do have a production account that we can do passwordless login and see what that activation looks like. So we'll get to it one way or the other. So what they start with here is just the, what can we do in the first 2 days? What can you do in the first month, the first 3 months, and then 6 months on? And they do iterate through these a few times where they're like, look at roles, look at roles, look at roles. So we'll see some repeats as it continues to go through, and I'll add to their details on things that we've actually taken action on and what our steps are going forward. So the first one here is, what can you do as far as quick wins? And using the Azure Privilege Identity Management is one of your first quick wins. The use of this does require that you have an Azure AD P2 or an EMS E5 license, but it does provide a lot of value to set which roles are eligible for users, require a step up in authentication. You can even assign approvals to those, and you don't have to have that higher permission set for all your users. You just need it for the users that are going to be using that privileged identity management in order to get a step up in their roles. And the roles that they identify initially to that you should control are obviously your global administrators, right? And then privileged role admins are another one if you're actually using those. We're not currently using those, but those are the users that can assign roles, and then your Exchange admins and your SharePoint admins. Now there's a lot of other roles that can be defined inside this, but those are the ones that Microsoft recognize that are as your largest exposure and the ones that you should adjust soon, and then evaluate your additional roles later. You still do want, even though you have these roles assigned, you still want to have at least 2 emergency access accounts or your break glass accounts. Those are kind of like when you first set up your tenant, you get a cloud only admin account that you have tucked away in some password management tool that allow you to get access to the tenant. You don't ever want to be locked out in an emergency. And then multi-factor authentication for your highly privileged users. There is a discrepancy on some of the documentation and some of the guidance I've had from Microsoft on a little bit of the, single user non-federated admin accounts versus having a user that you've isolated and using privileged identity management to only get access to that single user when you need it. The example of that is I've got my main collaboration account, and maybe I'm a SharePoint admin, and I can be granted read access to the content with my normal account, but I don't need to make changes to the SharePoint administrative interface or to SharePoint Online very often. And then I go to PIM and elevate myself up when I need to with just my standard account. And that's a really good experience, and it's a step in the right direction. It does leave that, when you elevate up, it does leave you open to a phishing attack or something to that extent, because it's your standard, your elevated account. The next step as we go through here is the frequently used attacks, where we're going to conduct an inventory of all your service accounts, owners, and your admins. And I can tell you, we've been using Office 365 for 6 years, and Active Directory existed for an extended period of time. We had way too many global admins that were assigned. Everybody in the security team needed global administrator for X, Y, and Z, and they don't use it very often, but it was assigned and not a eligible role. hasn't been that long that we actually had the P2 or the E5 suite across the company. So we hadn't actually implemented the privileged identity management. So if you were assigned that role, you had that role all the time, regardless of how you used it. We did do separation of accounts. So it was a secondary account, but that secondary account has rights on-prem, and then it had elevator rights in Office 365. And as we get further down here, we'll find where Microsoft really wants you, and it sets best practice that you need to separate out a privileged account that is on-prem and has access to do things to applications in your directory on-premise versus accounts that have access to do elevated permissions in the cloud. The second identify here, they're just identifying where, we did have scenarios where people had already registered an account and it was a school or work account, and then they used that same account that was registered against live services against the Office 365. So when you would go to log in, the telltale sign is you put in your username, which is your user principal name, and it comes up and says, hey, is this, are you going to use this for school or work, or are you going to use this for live services? And if you're choosing that, that means that email address or login name is registered in both directory, Azure Active Directory and live services directory. So there's a process to kind of break that connection so that it's only registered in one directory. The other step on here where I covered a little bit about phishing is that they want to ensure that your global administrators can receive email. So as we dedicate an account for a global administrator, you do want to assign that a license, and it doesn't need to be, a top tier license. It just needs to have a license assigned to it so that it has a mailbox. But we want that mailbox to have forward all mail to your standard account, so that you're not receiving any, reviewing and acting on any mail that's sent to that address or to that role, to be able to execute in context of that role. And again, this is where they're calling out that it should be a cloud only account. So it's a account that's created just in Azure. It's not an account that is federated back to your on-premise, and it doesn't have any permissions to your local directory. So it's really the separation of duties. And I know a lot of people have on-prem have kind of broken that, where it's like I have my normal account, then I have my elevated account, and I separated those out. Well, this is another way of, well, we need another account. It needs to be a cloud only account. So now I have 3 accounts, and that's kind of what led me down that path of, great, I've got 3 different passwords I need to manage. Oh, and the password management and expiration and session life and that whole scheme is different in Azure Active Directory than what we're already doing in Active Directory. So that's another challenge to have to manage that. And that's really what led me down the, maybe we could do passwordless, and what are our opportunities to do that, to make that a better experience. So migrating frequently used attacks. So we want to ensure passwords for administrative accounts have recently changed, or your other piece on that is don't assign a password to it. And we'll look at doing passwordless. And then along with this is the recommendation to turn on password hash. And this is something that we had done early on. We have a lot of domains that are registered, and many of them are federated if they're a primary email domain, so that the email address and the sign-in is the same for the user, so they have a good user experience. They don't have to know how their meal's being cooked. They just know that it's this is my login because this is my email. They don't have to have separate names for that. and it gives you kind of that break glass. So if we had something that catastrophically went bad in our data center, that we couldn't authenticate people through that federated link, because it does, our federation goes back to the local Active Directory and authenticates the current login and password, which does give us like account lockout validation and those type of things that you don't always get from an Azure just password hash, but it gives you that break glass. In an absolute emergency, you could flip it from a federated to a managed domain, and then it would actually use the password hash to log in. So their next guidance is doing the multi-factor authentication for these privileged roles, and that's where PIM enforces that and helps you do that. Along with that is inside of conditional access policies. With that requirement, you can also put in components that evaluate for the either network location you're coming from, or we try to do it against the Azure hybrid join devices. So when a machine is added to our domain, it's also added to Azure AD as a hybrid device. So we're able to evaluate that much like you'd evaluate a machine certificate and say, is this one of our computers? Is this a home computer or a bring your own device, so that we can say, well, I want a management to only happen from devices that I know that I'm managing and have the full security stack on it. Along with that, the conditional access rules is the ability to configure the identity protection and risk-based logins. And Microsoft has a whole, this is a whole nother topic, is risk-based logins, but it's basically they're capturing for a 2-week period, they're looking at what your activity is on a current asset and with your login. What are your daily, you're connecting from this access point or from this IP address. These are the normal tasks that you do throughout a day, and that sets a baseline. And if you do something outside that baseline, like I sync a whole bunch of new data from OneDrive, or I'm delete a whole bunch of data from OneDrive, and I don't know how many of you've seen that, where if you delete a whole bunch of data from OneDrive, you'll actually get a notification that says, hey, there's a large amount of content that was changed. Did you really mean to do that, or is something happening in OneDrive? Well, there's flags that add to that risk. So it's not just one activity, but it's several different activities that put you outside of your daily norm that add to that risk level. And when you reach a certain risk level, those conditional access policies, you can have it do things such as, I'm going to step up your authentication. I want you to actually MFA because you're doing something that is not typical. So I want to make sure it's you. And you could take it to another level. It's like, well, if you go from low to medium, then I want you to MFA. But if you go from low to high, you hit that high level. Actually, want to block your login, and you get blocked until somebody allows you in. We haven't implemented this yet. Some of it is just technical constraints, because our default MFA is still happening on-prem. So it's passing through that federation. The federation is identifying, where are you coming from? Do you need MFA or not? We're going to be evaluating. There's a flag that can be passed from that conditional access policy that passes it back to the federation provider and says, hey, I need to have this authentication, not just user and password, but I want a multi-factor. And so you can leverage that even not using the built-in MFA component inside of Office 365. I talked in detail about the conditional access policies already. So we'll look at a few more pieces here that they kind of have laid out and again, they do repeat, and there is a reference to the article that I pulled this to, and that article is full of additional links. It's not to be tackled lightly, and it definitely will take some time and effort to get all the way through it. And I think they did realize that, and that's why there's kind of the, what are you doing in the first 2 days? What can you do in the first month, and so forth. So we're looking at your security score. I know Michelle has given talks on that before, of actually evaluating your security score and improving your security posture in Office 365, doing your activity monitoring. Don't know why I got obtain. Oh, there's listed here twice in duplicate. Great. And then building out your incident and emergency response plans. Those are things that you do on-prem. It's just extending that, Microsoft identifying it, and then your securing your on-prem privileged accounts if you haven't already done that, right? So that's where it's like they identify it once, but they'll come back and repeat some of these components. Inventorying your subscriptions. So it's not just your licensing, but also your subscriptions, because this is targeted at not just M365, but also Azure. And then removing Microsoft accounts. That's that whole prompting for work or home accounts, that we don't want to have any home accounts that have administrative roles granted to them. And then looking at your Azure activity. And there is like an audit and receive notifications on important actions inside of your Azure subscriptions that you can sign up for and get some notifications on that. All right, what are we doing in the first 1 to 3 months? So we're completing your review of your administrators, you're doing the strong authentication, that's the MFA, or even going to passwordless, your dedicated workstations. So we haven't, Microsoft calls that out as a pod, and we really haven't got to dedicated administrative workstations at our corporation yet. Reviewing NIST guidelines, and what are you doing to kind of comply to those for incident handling, leveraging the privileged identity management and the just-in-time, so you don't always have assignments, and your sign-in protocols for Exchange Online. I know they've stated that several times, that they're locking down Exchange Online, and not all your POP and IMAP and SMTP protocols are going to be allowed through native clients. They're trying to get rid of the standard user and password and go to a modern auth, because it allows you to have more controls of that. What we have in place is we leverage conditional access policy that has an exception that, even though we haven't got to the point of being able to turn that off on all mailboxes, only by exception can you actually authenticate with IMAP or POP or SMTP as an end user. You have to have a specific application that still needs one of those backwards compatibility components to leverage it. The other piece that is discussed in here is about doing MFA, not just MFA for your cloud only accounts that you're protecting roles, but it's starting to step in, and what are we doing for MFA and stronger authentication, which is like the Microsoft Authenticator app, or the FIDO2 keys with your C-suite and your high-level managers and critical IT staff. Yep, that's good. And then we have a couple more items here that we're still taking for the 1 to 3 months. Your role reviews, and I could say that we have completed our role reviews, and who should have an eligible role, and assigning those. And then your incident management response compared to your organization, and secure on-prem privileged administrative accounts, which we had covered before. Again, there's a little rinse and repeat as you go through this. That require MFA, just in time, and then also, deploying advanced threat assessment to attack detection, which is part of the security suite. All right, continue building. So 6 months and beyond. What are we going to do 6 months and beyond? We're going to make sure that we have that break glass. What are we going to do in an emergency as far as those administrative accounts, or if we're using Federation and that breaks down, how do we've got plans documented and ready to be able to get the business up and continue to collaborate and access these cloud services, that even if we have a disruption in service between our on-premise and Office 365, that's where the synchronization of password hash really comes into play. Yeah, it's the securing privileged access and establishing your security awareness. That's using the secure score, and then continuing to remove your review your built-in M365 admin roles. And if you've got accounts that are in privileged accounts but privileged roles and you can't identify why they're in there, then it's time to just remove them. And our stance on that, a lot of those roles that were assigned, the people that needed them don't need to actually take action. They're just looking for read access. So that's where Microsoft continues to expand. So you don't have to be a global admin. You can be a global reader, or you can be just a report reader, or just they actually have a reading role for just the notifications that are in the admin console to see what's new and what's happening. We do assign read roles to your standard collaboration account, since you can't make changes with it, and it allows it to be a lot easier, less friction for the users that are in that role to access those resources. And then you want to keep auditing activity logs related to privileged accounts, and we have not just the audit logs from M365, but we've deployed the agents on all of our domain controllers that grab the Active Directory logs and roll that into a SEM that allow us to kind of take action on certain activities that we see happen. And that's a continuing process. It's never perfect. So privileged identity management, I want to talk about this just briefly, right? As that there's opportunities not just in the time and time bounding, but you can set approvals, you can set the MFA, you can require people to actually put a justification. That justification is just a little text box, like you would see for checking in or a file, and then get notifications and review who has access, including the downloading of that audit history. So you can see that we've got these people that are eligible for the role. When did they actually execute that role, and who had executed the role and had the permissions if a specific event happened, right? You go back to the audit logs, and that will tell you who specifically done it, but it also tells you if you need an audit trail. Yeah, we've reduced our administrators, but there's still a lot of people that are eligible. But how many of these people that are eligible are actually using those eligibility? One of the other pieces that is nice in here is the whole discovery, because there is a way, even if you only have one license for the Azure P2, you can go in and discover and see what the role assignments are in order to identify that a little better. And obviously there's role management and just the standard admin console as well. And then we've got our the license like I had talked about before. And then we've made it to the section where we're done going through slides, and we're gonna actually try to build some of this out here in my dev tenant. And so we'll see how this, how it all lines up here. So the first thing we want to do when we're in Office 365 here is I want to create that whole cloud user. And that's where I'm going to identify a isolated user that is a cloud only user that is not going to have an user sign-in name that follows that federation path. It is going to do just the cloud only auth. So we'll create new user, and we're doing Smith. And we're gonna create a password. I'm not gonna require them to change the password when they sign in because I'm not giving them the password. That's the plan as we go along this, and we'll go ahead and assign an E5 at this point. If I had other licenses, you could assign a lot less license, and you could even adjust the apps down and say that, yeah, that's great that we're gonna give you everything, but I really need you to really have like the P2 and don't see, it looks like it's everything in here. So you could get down in here, and a lot of times in these sections, they'll show you, besides just apps, that you could pull like SharePoint and other ones, and all I want them to have is Exchange. That is our goal in our production tenant, that we would just assign a mailbox. You don't need to assign a whole bunch of other resources to these users. And we're not going to define any roles. We're just going to create this user. I'm going to grab him so that we have him documented, and these are the things we want to do. So we'll put his address in here. We'll go full screen so we can. Right. Save settings and template. No, I don't need a template. All right, so we got John Smith. He's our administrative user. The next piece that we want to dig into with John Smith is can't log in. He's got a password, but let's go ahead and go to Azure Active Directory. And I think the first thing we'll look at is we'll look at the privilege identity management. So the simplest way that I found is that we go up here and we just type PIM, and then it's going to take me to that privilege identity management. And I'm logged in as the administrator. So I'm the break glass account. I have full admin rights. So we're going to look at Azure Id Roles. And we're going to assign an eligible role. So we're going to, here's all the role definitions. But we're going to add an assignment here. We're going to say that he's an exchange administrator. We're going to choose John Smith. And then here's kind of the settings, right? Eligible is that you can go promote up. And then active is that you're always assigning that role. So you're not really using privilege identity management. You're just putting them in and giving them that role. And this is where Microsoft's kind of leaving, hey, do you really want to permanently assign? Why are you permanently assigning, not just using when they're eligible? And then the eligibility, you can also go through and say when they're eligible. If you wanted to lock it out and say, this person, you know, they're a normal support person, we only do 8 to 5. So they don't need to come and get access to the role on the weekends, or they only work these shifts. So you do get flexibility in when you want to assign that. So we've signed the role, exchange. It should show me that who is assigned, but along with this, there's some additional settings. So the additional settings on here is how long is it active, is one of the pieces that if you want to adjust this, we can say, yeah, well, Exchange admin, maybe it's 8 hours is the typical, but you might have it where, you know, I don't want to elevate all the way up. Our global admin component, we went in and we had set that you're only going to get global admin for 2 years or 2 hours. So you can elevate to global admin, but you're only getting it for 2 hours. You don't need to have global admin longer. That's what the global reader is for, is to allow you to review and discover things. Um, uh, and then by default here, it's going to go ahead and require the MFA, which is what I was looking for. So we'll adjust how long they're able to check that out. In our production tenant, our plan for the Exchange and SharePoint admins, so we do have like a level 2 team that would need to check that out, that we're going to leave the default of 8 hours, because then when they use start their day, they'll be able to go elevate up and have that elevation and use that throughout the day without having to come back into Azure Active Directory. All right, so he's got an eligible role. You got an account. He has no way to log into the account. So if we go to our security components, is where we're get our authentication methods, and the new fun in authentication methods is actually these different authentication protocols or applications that are eligible. And the one that I really like here is the temporary access password. So the temporary access password allows me to onboard a user and give them a temporary password. And then that will expire. So I've never given them the permanent password. They have an authentication method for a temporary password to go self-enroll their Microsoft Authenticator app or their FIDO2 key. And once they've enrolled that, this expiration goes out and they've never had a password. So the guidance on you need to change your password frequently, well, I don't have a password to change frequently. I have a self-enrolled authentication method. And I'm going to just select.
Hey, Dennis, sorry, real quick.
Yeah.
There was a question in chat. I don't know if you want to do those towards the end.
No, we can do them as we go along. That's fine.
Okay. It was just from Brian, just on security recommendations for securing service accounts that need a enterprise license. So if you want to cover that after you finish going through here.
Yeah, we'll come back to that. Yeah, there is those, like the break glass account, right? You could have a service account or an automation account that needs to have either a license assigned to it or specific roles. So there are those exception pieces. So we're going to target users, and that's a nice thing that they're doing in the security space and the authentication space, that even for like requiring MFA or password reset, I see Passwordless as just a maturity level along that same path, that I can pilot it or pick a group of IT users or pick of like Ring 1 users that I want to be able to use this and not have to impact the entire organization. So I'm just gonna select that we can do it for John. And then we kind of got to go through the same thing. I'm going to allow him to have a FIDO key, and you could leave that on, that anybody could enroll in Passwordless, but we're gonna pilot it. So we're just gonna say that John's the only one that's allowed to do this. And this is the one piece that the Microsoft Authenticator app, I use it for a lot of different soft keys. I use it for actually passwordless with my collaboration account. There is a limitation, so this isn't any soft key. This is just the Microsoft Authenticator app. And along with this, it does evaluate that your device is meets the criteria to authenticate for passwordless. And the current limitation is that you can only register one account with the Microsoft Authenticator app to do passwordless login. And the rub that I have on this is that I've registered my collaboration account to do passwordless login. And now, following the guidance and I don't want to get phished, and I want to protect this account, and it should be a non-federated account, so it just lives in the cloud. There's no cross-pollinating between local Active Directory and in cloud services. But I can't use one of the strongest authentication, easiest to use, which is the Microsoft Authenticator application, because I've already registered it. And I fought with this back and forth, and I unregistered an account, and kind of broke my passwordless login for my one device. And I only have one phone that has the Microsoft Authenticator app. So that's kind of my piece that I can leverage. And I did find, talking to Microsoft, that they've identified that as a constraint, not just for this 1%. I see it as 1% for administrators that are walking this path to break out a dedicated cloud-only account to assign a role to, and need to elevate up and authenticate and get MFA. But also, if you are a consultant, you've got a whole bunch of tenants that you're logging into, and you can register the Microsoft Authenticator app, and I have for a lot of my demo tenants, and be able to do like a push notification to do a login. But it's not truly passwordless. There's still scenarios where you'll run into a password, much like that question for the service account. There are still exceptions to this, but so there's no really need at this point for me to do the Microsoft Authenticator app. If I was doing a pilot for my standard users, or my standard users including administrators, I could put people in here, and this would be an authentication method they could choose to register for passwordless. But I know I have that constraint because I already have a passwordless login available on my phone, that I won't be able to do it here. All right, so we've given him his 2, and actually we're gonna enable another one, because I'm skeptical that my FIDO key, that whether I'll actually be able to register it twice, because I have already registered it in my production tenant. So I know I'm using a UB key, and I'm using the cheap $20 UB key off of Amazon, since I purchased it myself. And I know there are versions of the UB key that have multiple partitions that would allow you to have multiple use cases. I don't know whether this one will actually let us do that, but we can do an SMS text message and try to see if we can get this account to actually get registered and work all the way through. If we're unable to do that, then I will show you what the prompt looks like, and the privileged identity management just against my production tenant, because it is a dedicated account, and only can be authenticated with passwordless, because there's no password that has ever been assigned to it. So we'll go back to, we've enabled passwordless enrollment, and we've got the account, and he's eligible to elevate up to a specific role, but we have to go in and register. And so if we choose this account, then there is, in authentication methods, is where we can actually Don't let me down. Where is it the new experience that allows me to create one? Yep, add authentication method. And we want to add the temporary password. And you can set a start delay. He can say that he can use it for an hour or how long they can use it, and whether it's one time. Now, Microsoft's current recommendation, when I was watching some of the Ignite sessions where they're demoing and where they announce passwordless that came out of preview mode, is that with this temporary access, that you may not want to do just the one-time use, even though one-time use is awesome. It is more secure, so I give them this password, they use it one time, but if I log into the website to do self-registration, and then I'm going to go log into the Microsoft Authenticator app on my phone in order to register Microsoft Authenticator as my passwordless authentication, I have to do 2 logins. So then I can't have it just a one-time login. So we're going to go ahead and leave that we're not delaying it. You're going to get it for an hour, and we're going to let you log in more than once. All right, so here's our, just gonna record this. Here we got our password with our account. This is just my security info. And we're gonna say okay. So then let's bring up a new in private browser. Say if we go to my security info. We got John Smith. So grab John Smith here. And here's, it recognized with the John Smith ID that I have an authentication method for temporary access pass. So I was excited the first time I seen that. I was like, oh, that's a completely different login. The other piece is that I really enjoy as a collaboration user. When I enroll my standard account, typically if you just do like when you federate a domain, anytime you put in a domain, Microsoft's default is to look for the home realm as they define it. And that's where they're looking at, this at security pa.on, if I had like a, let's say landolakes.com. I put in at landolakes.com. It looks for your home realm and says, where's landolakes.com? Is that a managed domain or is that a federated domain? If it's federated, it's like, okay, there's a URL that tells me where I'm supposed to send that authentication. And I'm going to send that authentication off and wait for it to authenticate. And then the IDP that I send it to is going to send me back a validation token that user actually successfully authenticated. When you've got passwordless enabled, it actually looks at the full username and will allow you to authenticate with passwordless without just sending it to the federated provider, because our federated provider does not recognize passwordless, and it's actually just authenticating straight against Azure. So they've changed that logic of, well, instead of just looking at the domain, it also breaks down and says, well, who's the actual user? And what is that actual user able to do? Are they able to do passwordless? In this case, do they have a temporary password as an authentication method? So it looks at what the authentication methods that are activated on the account, not just which domain are you going to. So that's a change in the flow. All right, so it wants us to get signed in here and getting started with our app. I'm going to go ahead and see what, I don't think I can do a full registration, but I'll go ahead and test using my Authenticator app and adding it if it will do part of it. So I'm just, can't display it, but I'm just going to say add. And this is a work or school account. And I say scan QR code. And it just comes up and you hover it over the screen, it picks it up. And it adds the account. So it didn't ask me for a password or anything because I don't have a password for the account, but it added the account. Then it pushes a push notification, approve sign in to make sure that I've actually got a verification. It also did a facial recognition on my phone that to authorize that adding to my Microsoft Authenticator. So it's registered, but it's not a single sign-on. And we can say, we'll just say yes. So I don't have passwordless, even though I do have a stronger authentication. I just have this temporary. So I'm going to go ahead and add a method. And I'm curious if we put if I actually put my UB key in my workstation here, if it's actually going to let me authenticate. So I've got a security key and it's a USB device. So it's going to scan for that USB device. And as I was concerned, since I've already registered it wasn't able to use that key because I already have the key as a sign-in. So let's try another one and say that we're going to do phone. And I actually have to choose a phone number that I can receive a text to. All right, so then we get to put in a text code. This is always fun. And I don't like SMS texting. Not only did I see a news article not that long ago that you could basically hijack any SMS text for about $16. But it's just not the most user-friendly way of logging in. So I do have a phone. It should be an authentication method. So let's go ahead and log off of this and see what we can get if we go back and we get a new session. Because our goal is to be able to have this cloud only account and log in and actually get the privileged identity management role that was assigned to me. So if I go to portal.azure.com and I want to log in as this user, what do I get? Use user password instead. No. All right. Since my user password's still good, I guess I have to, let's see if we can remove that and force it to. Force him to actually sign in. And we need to go to this, which is my security info. It's great I signed into Azure. Maybe later we'll do the tour, but we really want see if we remove, and I don't know whether I can remove it from, or I've always just let it expire, but we can see if we delete it, if it will force it to actually leverage it now. So we do another in private browser. Yeah, and he just wants to do an auth. All right. So we're going to switch over, and I'll show you what the experience is from a production account. Because my YubiKey failed me and the SMS wasn't logged in correctly, but it's okay. I knew that this was going to be challenging to show in a test tenant without buying additional resources and having everything in line. Yeah, verify. Heck, that's not what is supposed to happen. D. Alexander. Alex. Okay. Nice loop. All right, we'll try it on.
Ryan commented that it was mentioned, that it's mentioned something about it in private not being supported.
Oh, thanks for pulling it out. And I think I remember that before. Thanks for calling that out, Brian.
Ryan, no B.
Ryan. All right, so let's. I wonder if our SMS text will try this guy here. No. All right. All right, we'll try one more method until I have to go to the slide deck, as we'll grab a different browser on a different computer here. That's the whole pollution of sessions. There's the pollution of sessions, where it knew who I was. Another browser. That's have as many browsers as you can, then you. Are you gonna prompt me for login? Please prompt me for login. No, you're gonna grab whatever login credentials I had, which is my standard user. Can I sign out and actually get you to? There we go. This is the user I want. All right, so we finally did get to where it sees a pen. So it needs the pen for my key. And then the key's flashing. So you just have to touch that, yeah, I actually have the key available. And then I get a passwordless login to Azure. I'm logged into my Land O'Lakes Inc., which at this time, it doesn't even have email routing to it. So it's a cloud-only tenant. As this user, he doesn't have any roles that are assigned to him. He only has eligible roles. So I've got the ability to activate this global admin role. And I can activate it anytime, but it's only activated for 2 hours. And I can do a custom time where it's like, well, I only need it for, a very short period of time. And then I have to provide some level of reasoning why I'm activating the role. So I only need it for 30 minutes. And then it's going to walk through here and go through the stages. Along with these stages, we did look at how long activation could be good for, and that what your authentication step up is going to be. The other pieces you can do with this is you can actually assign approval process, where it's like, that's great that you want this role, but this team has to actually approve it. So you can assign approvers so that it's not just a self-approval. I don't see a current use case where we have defined administrative roles for activities that we would actually have an approval process. That approval process, like for making a change in Office 365, would be a change thing that we would expect or have via policy that you would look at the audit log and monitor, is that there's a change through like ServiceNow, and you're putting that change number in here, and it would just be a written policy, not a technology policy, that you're actually putting an approved change to get access to that role. So now I'm a global admin. It would allow me to actually do any level of administration in Office 365 that I wanted to. And then for the question around security counts, so there's still an instance that I see us leveraging user and passwords. We do have a level of automation that is that's generated and used for auditing and reviewing Office 365 groups, doing some dynamic group management in Office 365 that's more customized than just the attributes that we have synced. We do a delegation of OneDrive and mailboxes on when an employee leaves the company. Their manager will receive access to that. I know OneDrive will do it automatically, but it does it automatically when the user is no longer synchronized to Azure. So if you moved them to an OU that wasn't synced, or the account is deleted, then OneDrive automatically sends that notification. But we want to do it before we start that timer, because we don't remove accounts until 30 days after the termination process, in order to allow for 60 days of recovery of a mailbox, and that's a legal requirement for our organization. So there are PowerShell components that are using standard authentication to log in and have to have those privileges, but it's about just reducing those roles and identifying those niche requirements. So that's that is really everything I had to walk through today, and I appreciate everybody that struggled through with me. I knew that that some of that setup wasn't going to be absolutely seamless, but at the same point, I wanted you guys to have some of the experience that I had when I first set it up, where it's really not that difficult. There are some, requirements of like what version of Windows do you have or something like that to allow the passwordless or using the Microsoft Authenticator app. But overall, for the level of investment and how much user productivity and security level you get, it adds a lot, and even though it was very confusing, jumping to all these different browsers, how could I actually get signed in, and finally signed in with um, a corporate account instead of the account that we created. The one thing that I didn't point out is that we never were actually prompted to MFA, that the YubiKey login or the Microsoft Authenticator login to Azure is recognized in the sign-in logs as a Windows Hello sign-in and as an MFA sign-in. So you don't get prompted to authenticate up because you already authenticated with a strong authentication method. So any more questions, or I can give you a little break before you guys run off to your next session, and wish you guys the best for your day's activities.
And before people head out, Dennis